President Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Will his guilty verdict affect the outcome of the presidential race? Joining me now to discuss is Dr. Richard L. Abel, author of How Autocrats Seek Power, Resistance to Trump and Trumpism, and Thomas G. Del Vaccaro, attorney and author of The Lessons of American Civilization. Thank you both for joining me today.
Happy to be
My
here.
pleasure.
So I want to start off with you, Dr. Abel. Your book about autocrats seeking power and resistance to Trump and Trumpism is so apropos for this moment as we see New York engaging in some of that resistance behavior.
Yes, well, the verdict has come down. We know there'll be a sentencing in about a month. Obviously, we're interested to find out what the sentence is going to be. I don't think it's going to be dispositive one way or the other. Obviously, Trump will appeal. He will remain out of custody regardless of what the sentence is. And the polling data on what the effect of the verdict will be is very inconclusive. So I applaud the verdict. I think the trial went as it was supposed to go. I would be very surprised if an appeal is successful, but I don't think it's going to have a major effect on the outcome.
The outcome of the election, you feel that
Yes.
the actual. All right, and then I'm interested to hear your thoughts. So, Thomas, what do you make of the verdict yesterday and the fact that President Trump was convicted on what were essentially misdemeanors that were piggybacked onto a felony charge? They were outside of the statute of limitations. The time to actually prosecute on these charges had passed, yet you see them actually cobbling this together and successfully convicting him on it. What do you make of it?
Well, I've been a practicing attorney for 35 years and involved in the appellate process, and I'd be shocked if it isn't overturned. Keep in mind that the Sixth Amendment point blank says that any accused shall be informed of the nature and the cause of the accusation. So when did we learn that nature? Well, during the jury instruction. Trump wasn't afforded the ability to know what these other crimes were. And so think of it this way. If the charge is you robbed a store in Philadelphia on May 10th, your defense is, well, I wasn't in Philadelphia on May 10th. Well, the problem for Trump was, since he didn't know what these 2 and 3 other crimes were, he couldn't put on a defense to say, I didn't do those things. So I'm troubled that anyone would think this wasn't way beyond the pale. Keep in mind, in Georgia, in that particular case, the judge just dismissed charges saying they lacked specificity such that they weren't constitutional because the defendant didn't know what the cause and the charge against him was. Well, in this case, that didn't occur at all. So you're going to find that this will be appealed on a myriad of issues. I think it will be overturned, but that could probably happen in a year from now. The question, as a historian and someone who been reading polls for decades, is it's one thing to ask people in advance, what will you do if? It's a whole nother thing to say, if the if comes true, then they look at it and what's their opinion at that point? So I expect the polls to remain volatile. You have a very unpopular president. Inflation has felled many a leader worldwide. It did to Jimmy Carter. It's not going to turn around. Inflation just ticked up again. And so I expect this race to remain close the rest of the way. Trump raised $34.8 million overnight. Does that come from new money or the same money? You have David Ackman and others, huge billionaires now coming to the Trump side based on this. In the immortal words of some TV executives, stay tuned.
So I agree with you. Stay tuned. This is an unprecedented and uncharted set of waters for Americans. Usually we see sitting presidents or leaders putting their political opponents in jail or prosecuting them for crimes. We see that in third world dictatorships. We see it in Russia. We don't usually see that on American shores. That this has never been done before. So I turn to you, Dr. Abel, because I think there is a significant segment of the American populace that thinks as you do. But I wonder how we go forward with this new reality where if you're in politics and you hold an incorrect view that millions of people oppose, that you could then see your livelihood attacked, you could be brought up on charges, you could see these kind of extrajudicial prosecutions going on against pretty much anyone now.
There was nothing extrajudicial about the process here. Trump was informed of the charges that were made against him. He had more than adequate counsel. He had plenty of time to prepare. He has almost unlimited amounts of money to spend on his legal defense. I think what one should focus on is that the attempt to undermine the legitimacy of the judiciary has been a Republican cause now mastered by Trump, led by Trump, but now echoed by virtually every Republican in the country. And it is perhaps one of the most dangerous things that could happen. If Americans lose faith in their courts, then the whole system has the danger of collapsing. Who is the person causing them to lose faith? It is Donald Trump and the Republicans who echo him.
Well, I think, Dr. Abel, you're giving a lot of power to President Trump that he simply doesn't have. If he were putting forward assertions about the judicial system that Americans hadn't experienced themselves, you would see a turning of the opinion against him. People don't agree with things that they don't find to be relevant in their own lives. So the fact that you have half of the country saying that our court system, especially in New York City, Georgia, and even in Florida and Washington, D.C., that these cases are baseless. You see the polls showing significant portions of independents who don't see how this relates to their lives. They don't see how it's important to them that the prosecution of Trump, once he is no longer president, looks like election interference. The cases were saved until the year of the election instead of being prosecuted immediately after he left office. There is a sense of illegitimacy to it that defies partisanship.
Election interference has been the slogan that Trump has raised. And of course, it turns on its head exactly what he did. The most egregious instance of election interference was his attempt to invalidate the 2020 election on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, leading up to the climax when he called on his supporters to go to Washington because it will be wild, when he exhorted them from the ellipse to go to the Capitol, when he promised falsely to march with them, and then when he cheered on their activities, and now has claimed that if he is elected president, he will pardon the 1,400 people who have been convicted by juries and by judges in the District of Columbia of trashing the Capitol and attacking police officers. That
So
is
I,
the threat to America.
so we disagree on that, but there's a lot of what you said here today that actually defies logic when you look at the similar actions taken by Democrats across the country. We've not seen prosecutions of Antifa members who caused billions of dollars of damage and sustained rioting that lasted about 9 months over the course of the year that actually followed the death of George Floyd. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. I have to come back to you, Tom. When we talk about the two different viewpoints that we're seeing right here on the program today, this is a function of the media telling one story with the exclusion of the other side. How do we get out of this? Like, how do we get to a place where everyone can see the same thing and then make analysis based on the same facts?
Well, over my shoulder is my book, The Divided Era, which goes over the history of American political division. And the reality is, we have had, for most of our history, a very divided media. I mean, you can go back to Samuel Adams and James Otis and their point of view, and the British loyalist point of view as fueling what became a revolution. You had the run up to the Civil War, very divided media during that period of time. So we have that again. That's actually the norm. The problem is, as government grows, every dollar it spends creates a competition to get that dollar and a bigger competition to get handed out. And so the source of our current divisions is this huge divide between parties and their priorities. When government has to make the decision and bring the hammer down saying one side wins, one side loses, that's what's causing our division. So when you increase government mathematically in history, you increase division. But I got to go back to this notion that the Republicans are undermining the judiciary. We have a rich history of this. Thomas Jefferson warned us about judges and assuming power. It is Joe Biden who flaunts, like anybody else since FDR, saying that the Supreme Court tried to stop me and I got around them, defying the court system. So this idea that it's Republican just doesn't wash with history in any respect.
So I think Dr. Abel will allow you to respond to that.
Yes, exactly. It's simply false. The Republicans now, over decades, have sought to stack the federal courts with Federalist Society members. They've been explicit about that. Mitch McConnell said that it's his proudest boast that he had packed the courts in such a way that for the next 4 years, the Biden administration would not be able to change the balance of power in the federal courts. And it's clear that Trump felt that he owned the Supreme Court because he had appointed 3 of its members. He says that explicitly. And indeed, the court is split perfectly along those political lines. I have done, I'm not going to hold my books up, but in my books, I analyzed the cases that were brought during the Trump administration concerning immigration, concerning elections, and concerning the pandemic. And the judges split between Republican appointees and Democratic appointees with a correlation of 0.00002, which is almost a perfect correlation.
Yeah. So we're
by the way, Biden is boasting that he has outdone Trump in appointing judges. So it's not one side or the other; it's both.
It's both. And I would say instead of conservative or Republican, we're looking at what's constitutional and what's unconstitutional, and that should be the primary focus. Coming up, Bill D'Agostino, thank you both for joining me. Senior Research Analyst at the MRC will join me to discuss CNN's all-time low viewership. And after this S&C Fast Break, we'll have Young Voices contributor and fiscal policy manager Susanna Barnes right after this.